All right. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So there's gonna be multiple different topics. Uh, the main topic I want to talk about is like certain players, past and present. Only notable players, and they have to play a certain amount of playoff games. And we can go back and forth to a current player, past player, and we'll talk in their prime. Was this player, a playoff increaser? Did he decrease in the playoffs? Like, how good was this player in the playoffs in their prime? Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So we'll start with the current player. Who do you want to talk about first?
Um, well, you know what? I'm a Chicago Bulls fan. Let's start with DeMar DeRozan. I know he's not in the playoffs, but start with DeMar DeRozan.
Okay.
Um,
Does that include his time with the Raptors too?
yeah, I feel like if that's how you want to do it, like just as a whole, like their playoff
Okay.
time.
All right.
Do you want to start first? Or do you want me to start first?
You can start first, actually.
Okay. I mean, I feel like this one, most people would say that he is a playoff dropper. And I probably would have to agree, even as a Bulls fan, to an extent. Um, I don't know. I mean, like he's had some moments that I feel like go maybe overlooked. Like I think he had a big game seven against Miami in 2016 that pushed them to the conference finals, and then he had a big game two last year against Milwaukee where he dropped like 41 points. I believe that was a playoff career high. So he's had these big moments, but then he's also like gotten swept by Washington. Basically, LeBronto is what they called it for many years. Every time he went up against the Cavs with LeBron, so he's had a lot of ups and downs. I think the one thing is that he's such a prolific mid-range shooter, and he's such an efficient 2-point scorer. Obviously, never been a 3-point scorer by any means, but in the playoffs, he's just not as efficient either, like from that level. And then as a playmaker, he doesn't do quite as much. I'm sure you remember the one series where him and Lowry essentially only, I think, contributed as just slightly more points and assists as LeBron throughout the series, and also like took more shots, so they were less efficient. And then they lost that in 4 games, and then he ended up, I think, getting ejected in the last game too. So and that was also his last game as a Raptor. But I don't know. I think DeMar DeRozan, he definitely is a playoff dropper. I do think maybe he gets a little too much hate for it, but um, I mean, hey, it is what it is.
Yeah, I agree. I would say more often than less, DeMar DeRozan does drop in the playoffs, especially when he was with the Raptors, because the Raptors like 2016, 2017, and yeah, 20, and also I think 2018. So 3 years in a row, the Raptors lost against the Cavs, and pretty much all three of those series, DeRozan uh, underperforms. His efficiency go down in the playoffs. He doesn't do as good as a job putting scoring the ball. Of course, like you said, he's elite from mid range, but it doesn't seem like from in the playoffs he doesn't do as good from mid range.
Yeah, and sometimes he's even been exploited, like defensively, because
Yeah,
he'll get into this time, especially recently. He'll get into this time where maybe he'll take plays off. I actually think his game or his series with the Spurs against Denver a couple years ago is a little bit underrated. I thought he was pretty solid then,
yeah,
but overall, I mean, there's been probably more downs than ups.
and I could be wrong, but I feel like when he was playing for the Toronto Raptors, it feels like in the playoffs he was trying to change the way he played, different from like the regular season.
Hmm. Yeah, it almost felt like there was pressure in a way. I don't know if maybe because it seems like too later in the year. Maybe one thing for him is that like he plays so many games throughout. He's one of the most durable players. I think just total points wise, I think he's only behind LeBron and James Harden like over the last decade in total points or something like that. I could be wrong, but the point is like this guy hardly misses games. And come playoff time, it seems like usually his legs are more fatigued. I wonder if if he took the Kawhi route or the Jimmy Butler route or what you see with some of these other guys, I mean, like LeBron's been doing it more recently. Like, I wonder how he would fare in the playoffs if he had like a load management season. Because if you think about DeMar, when's the last time he suffered like a major injury mid-season? it's hard to really think of. He's almost played probably 80, 85% at least of the games every year of his career, probably. So I wonder how that would happen. But I especially don't think it's going to happen now that the award thing. They're going to have it like 65 games for the new CBA starting next year. So I feel like that would only make it less likely for load management, especially for a guy like him who didn't do it in the first place. So, but it's just something interesting to think about.
All right. Let's move on to the next player. Okay, let's do a
Okay.
retired player. Let's do Dirk Nowitzki, actually.
Dirk Nowitzki, that's my guy. Do you wanna
Yes, I
you
do.
wanna start first?
Yes, I do,
Okay.
actually. So, one thing I noticed about Dirk, especially when he was playing, even now today, when he's retired, people have labeled him as a playoff choker, especially before he finally won a championship in 2011. But if you want my honest opinion, even before 2011, because I was watching NBA basketball before 2011, I never really consider Dirk as big of a playoff choker as what many consider him to be. Yes, he did have playoff series and playoff games where he underperformed or choked. I will say in 2007, he definitely choked in that series because in a closing game, I think he scored like only 8 or 10 points. In the game before that, he didn't do good. The year where number one seed Mavericks lost against number 8, I think it was the Warriors. In 2006, in the finals, in the last like 2 or 3 games, I will say Dirk underperformed. Other than that, I would say from 2001 to 2010, Dirk was usually pretty good, pretty consistent in the playoffs. Like I don't know if you know this, but from 2001 to 2010, when facing elimination, Dirk averaged like 28 points and a 49 field goal percentage. So I mean, he was averaging about 8 or 9 rebounds, which is the same amount we did in the regular season. I know some people are gonna say, "Oh, we didn't play any defense." I mean, Dirk was never known for his defense, anyways. He was always known that guy for his scoring, perimeter scoring.
Yeah, I mean, I just pulled it up real quick and just looking at every individual playoff series, he's averaged over 19 a game every playoff series of his career, and I mean, other than I think his last one or something like that, he averaged over 7.5 rebounds, which is pretty consistent. Like obviously you're gonna have ups and down playoff series, especially for a guy like that who probably has like about 200 or so, maybe a little bit less, but like about 200 playoff games played. Yeah, I think like he's had like a lot of series, even like early in his day. I know he had a really big series against Kevin Garnett in 2002 that I think a lot of people maybe forget about, especially when we're comparing those guys. Like, people look at they both have a championship, and then they want to, I think, elevate Dirk maybe a little bit more. At least most people, just because of the Finals MVP. But you could even look back at like 2002 when they played in the first round, and I believe he swept him. And Dirk was like, I think that might have been Dirk's like best statistical series too. And then the next year, I know they had a hard fought series against the Kings. I think Chris Webber got hurt that series, but still. But then the next series in the conference finals, they were playing the Spurs. I thought they could have contested them very well, and then of course Dirk goes down with an injury. But other than that, I mean, for the most part, he showed up. I mean, maybe you could argue in the '06 finals that he was also not so great after game two, but at the same point, like a lot of people also say that maybe that final series was a little bit suspicious because the Heat got a lot of free throws after game two. 2007, there's not really much defending him there. But I think at the same point, like what he did in 2011 makes up for his 2007 collapse and even more. Because you think about all the guys, maybe not all of them are fully developed then, but like think about all the future Hall of Famers or current Hall of Famers were in that run. You got in the first round, you got LaMarcus Aldridge. He might be in the Hall of Fame one day. Brandon Roy, if he wasn't injured, probably would have actually not probably. He definitely would have been in the Hall of Fame. And then the next round you play against Kobe and Powell, and then the next round you play Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden, and then you go up against LeBron, D Wade, and Chris Bosh in the finals. Like that's 10 Hall of Fame level players. And if you think about it, like around him, the only other Hall of Famer he probably had was Jason Kidd. I mean, maybe Peja Stojakovic makes it, but he wasn't. Both of them were really kind of past their prime, if we're being all real. So the fact that he played so great in that series, I mean, he was remarkable against the Thunder, and I mean, in the Miami series, he was great down the stretch of the games too. Um, but overall, I mean, I think he's definitely a playoff riser. Like I think other than like I said those 06, 07 years, that's probably the only two instances where you could use it against him. And I think honestly, like what this would feel like to me is like let's say I feel like it's really similar to Devin Booker. Like let's say Devin Booker goes on for another like 8 9 years and he puts up great playoff performance after great playoff performance. You know, obviously he lost the finals in 2021, and then 2022 it's deemed as an embarrassment losing to Dallas, right? Like it almost has like a similar vibe to it, but I don't know. I think if Devin Booker goes the next 8 or 9 years playing well, wins a championship for Phoenix, nobody's going to be talking about him as a bad playoff performer. So I feel like it's kind of the same thing with Dirk Nowitzki here.
Yeah, Dirk 2011 playoff run, in my opinion, is one of the best playoff runs by a player. What impressed me the most about that playoff run was how good he was in clutch situations. And also another thing I want to say is in 2009, I think the Nuggets took out the Mavericks. I think it was the semifinals. I think Dirk averaged like nearly 35 points and shot over 50% in that series. In the 2008, I think the Spurs took out the Mavericks, and Dirk did really good in that series too.
Yeah, I mean he's had a lot of crazy series. I'm trying to see just he's had four total 30 point per game series. And you think about the era this was, like how much slower pace this was. I'm seeing also another four where he was above 27, maybe easily could have got 30 if he was playing in today's age. Like you just think about that. Like not people aren't supposed to be averaging those numbers in the playoffs. There's a reason why I believe Michael Jordan's the only player that has a 30 point per game or higher career average in the playoffs. So the fact that he did that four times, maybe in today's era you could argue 8 or 9 times. That's almost like one series every year. Like that's kind of crazy.
All right, let's move on to the next player. Let's do a current player. Who do you want to talk about?
Uh, a current player. You know what? I don't know. We'll talk about Jimmy Butler.
Okay.
I feel like. Um, I think like so for me, like I've been kind of talking about this a lot lately, and I feel like for me personally, people overrate what Jimmy Butler's done in the bubble and stuff, and maybe they even overrate what he did last season. Um, because there's been a lot of times in the playoffs where he hasn't maybe performed the way that he should have. Like in 2013, he was basically a full time starter. And then against the Nets, he had a crucially bad game seven. Like he was almost the worst starter on the team. Then the next year against Washington, he didn't show up. And then in 2015, the last three games didn't show up. After having a 2-0 lead, and then Rajon Rondo goes down with the Celtics, he basically went missing. And then, of course, with Minnesota in 2018, he wasn't really there. And then the next year in 2019 with the Sixers, he had some high moments. Of course, he had that clutch layup in Game Seven, but I think people forget that he really wasn't playing good in that game either. Like so, and then of course 2020 was the bubble, and I give him that was a pretty solid year for him. I think against he got the last laugh I guess on T.J. Warren because their little like riff with the bubble and stuff like that. I think the Milwaukee Bucks series was more about Bam probably than any other Heat player, just because how he kept Giannis in check, and then also he was providing at a high level offensively too. And leading up to the finals, like Bam and Dragic were leading the team in four of the five major stat categories, and then obviously they both got hurt. And Jimmy went off in the finals, but of course it wasn't gonna win. Then the next year got outscored by Bryn Forbes, and then last year maybe it's even a little bit overstretched because you're playing Atlanta. He didn't close out the series. Victor Oladipo had a big game to do so, and then the next series against Philadelphia, Joel Embiid missed the first two games. They were starting DeAndre Jordan, a guy who, if we're being honest, he's not a real NBA player at this point. It's not 2017 anymore. And then even in the last series, like he had three bad games. I think he had a 3 game stretch where he averaged 9 points against your Boston Celtics, and then in Game Seven, in the last 5 or 6 minutes of the game, he's the only Heat player. No substitutions were made, but he's the only Heat player on the floor that didn't score or assist on any of the baskets. But then he gets kind of praised for missing that three that could have basically won them the game. And I know so far, like we've seen Game 1 of this series against Milwaukee. Of course, Giannis went down, Tyler Hero went down, and he did play good, so I'll give him that. But and I will say like so I guess in this discussion of playoff riser or playoff dropper, I will definitely say that he's a playoff riser. But what I will say is it's a little bit inconsistent of how much he rises, how much he doesn't, because it's not a whole lot of years where he's actually risen. There's probably more years where he's actually dropped. You could argue. So because of that, I think maybe he's overrated as a playoff performer. But I will give him the benefit of the doubt, and just because like his scoring goes up, I believe his rebounds go up. I will say that he's a playoff riser. It's just really inconsistent, and I feel like people should pay more attention to that personally.
Yeah, I agree. I will still consider Jimmy Butler a playoff riser. I just don't think he's much of a playoff riser as what many consider him to be. Like, before the 2020 playoffs, he really didn't make much noise in the playoffs. I'm not saying he never had any good playoff performances before 2020, but before 2020, no one considered him this godlike or superstar player. Because after the 2020 bubble playoffs, people for some reason after just one good or whatever playoff run, people are like, oh my god, look at playoff Jimmy Butler. But to be honest with you, like the first 3 rounds in the 2020 playoffs, Jimmy Butler, he was playing good, but he was not playing like a superstar. To me, the finals was the only series in the 2020 playoffs I would consider or say Jimmy Butler was playing the playoffs. Like I would hype his 2022 playoffs more. Yeah, 2022 playoffs more because in the he averaged like 27 points in those playoffs, and at least throughout the entire playoffs he was consistent and playing really good. In the like 2020 playoffs, he was averaging like 22 or 23 points. Like he increased more in the playoffs in 2022 than what he did in 2020.
I think like just the thing. So he's played 19 career playoff series, and I think over his career you could argue he's played like a star level, like above all star, like a star level player in maybe three of them, and that would be two of them last year, like against Atlanta and Philadelphia. Like I said though, like those series, like you had injuries with Philadelphia, a crucial one with Embiid, because I think that series turns a different way if Embiid is healthy. And then as for Atlanta, he didn't close out the series. Like he kind of sat the last game. That really shouldn't have even been a competition. And honestly, like I'm even surprised in the play-in this year that it they did blow that game. But and then in the finals, like you said in the bubble, like those are probably the only series I would consider him like a star level player. I wouldn't even consider him a star level player last year against your Celtics, just because he was so up and down. I know he had a crucial, I think it was Game 6. He had like a 40 piece or something. But when you have three straight games where you were averaging 9 points in the middle of the series, and then you basically go missing down the stretch of Game 7, and I believe he wasn't really great in Game 2 either. Like, I can't say you're a star level player. Maybe all star because all stars they're up and down sometimes and stuff like that. But the superstars are gonna be there no matter what. And that series he just wasn't. So if you think 3 for 19, I mean, hey, unless unless you're a Russell Westbrook fan, you're probably not a huge fan of 3 for 19 right now, just because that's how he shot from the field the other day.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
That so 2021. I forgot who the Heat lost against. Jimmy Butler. He
the
choked in it.
Bucks.
Okay, Bucks. Yeah,
The
Jimmy
Bucks.
Butler. He
Bryn,
choked.
Bryn Forbes outscored him.
Yeah, he choked. Jimmy Butler. Yeah, I mean, I don't care what anyone says. If you're a Jimmy Butler fan, he choked in that series.
Yeah, and that's on top. That's probably even the worst one, which is crazy because, like you even said, prior to 2020, like it was just a bunch of playoff disappointments. I'd argue that Minnesota series was maybe equally as bad by
Didn't
him.
didn't he shoot like 35% in that series or something like that?
I mean, he didn't shoot bad. He just
Oh,
wasn't aggressive. Like
okay.
he averaged like 15 points. Like I personally think. I mean, this might be just the D Rose fan of me, but I think D Rose was their best player in that series. He averaged like 14 and 3 off the bench and shot 50, 70, 86 splits for a guy that wasn't expected to do anything that series. I feel like that's pretty insane.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure there's one playoff series where Jimmy Butler shot like only 35%.
He scored just as many points. Actually, he got outscored in that series by Clint Capella.
Oh my
That
god.
probably tells you all you need to know about that series. Um, yeah.
All right. let's move on to the next player. You know what? I'm gonna do Larry Bird. Okay, Larry Bird is another player I noticed. People will say, "Oh, Larry Bird, he more often than less dropped in the playoffs. Like he wasn't as good in the playoffs than he was in a regular season." And I would say they're half right and they're half wrong. Because with Larry Bird, he was kind of confused in the playoffs, like when it comes to increasing or decreasing, because it was confusing. Like for example, in the 1981 playoffs, before Larry Bird was known as a three-point shooter, he actually shot like over 40% in the playoffs that year, and he averaged like 21 points, I think like 14 rebounds, 5 or 6 assists. So his numbers actually went up, and he was actually more efficient. And of course, 81, the Celtics went on to win the championship. I will say in the 81 finals, Larry Bird did struggle in that series because he only averaged 15 points. But overall in the playoffs, 81 playoffs compared to the regular season, I would say he more so increased than decreased. And then you have the 84 playoffs. His points per game went up by like 3 or 4. Because in playoffs, he averaged like 27 points, 10 boards, 5, 6 assists. And his efficiency went up. In Game 7 of the 1984 semifinals, I believe, against the Knicks, he had like a 39 points, 12 boards, and 10 assists. And of course, against the Lakers in the finals, he averaged like 27 points, 14 rebounds, 3 assists. Well, one thing I will say about the '84 finals, even though it shows that Larry Bird shot like about like 45 to 50%, he wasn't as consistent because in that series because he had like 2 or 3 games where he didn't shoot as good. I think what helped his field goal percentage to look good was I think game 4 or game 5 he shot like 75%. Because in game 7 he didn't shoot that good. He played good, but his shooting efficiency wasn't good in that series. And of course, like 85, Larry Bird actually did drop. I think in the playoffs, like his 3-point shooting really dropped. And of course, in the finals, he wasn't consistent. And then 86 playoffs, like 1986 is the only season in Larry Bird's career I can think of where like he was great in the regular season, and he in the playoffs he didn't increase. I mean he decrease. He actually increased because in the regular season and playoffs in 1986 was the only season I can think of where Bird shot about 40% from three. But in the playoffs in '86, Bird's I think efficiency got a little bit better. He was a better playmaker, and I think he was also more clutch.
Yeah, I mean, personally for me, I mean Larry Bird is a top five player all time. So I think like you just look at like some of the series that he's had. I mean, he came out like straight in the gate, had a pretty impressive series as a rookie against I believe the Rockets, and then he came back down 3-1 against the Dr. J led 76ers. And I feel like people kind of like criticize him for that year because he didn't win Finals MVP and Cedric Maxwell did. But at the same time, it's like he put on an insane performance to get them to that Finals. So, and that was again down 3-1 against Dr. J and the 76ers. So you definitely got to give him credit there. I think definitely his rebounding, I think, might have even went up in the playoffs. I don't have the stats like
You talk about
just
in
right
'81.
here. Just in general, I'm talking like from the regular season to the postseason. But overall, I mean, this guy like he's had big performances on the biggest stages. I think he went like toe to toe with Bernard King one year as well, like in the mid '80s, and
'84.
then of course, yeah, '84. And then obviously like I feel like personally he never really had like a bad like shooting wise series in the finals other than that 1981 year. And then maybe like later in his career, like those years might be like kind of skewed just because he had injuries and stuff. But overall, I mean, probably Larry Bird from like almost every year in the '80s until maybe like '89 or something like that. Like yeah, he was definitely a playoff riser to me.
Yeah, another thing about Larry Bird is people talk about how great Game 7 LeBron is, which I agree with. But Larry Bird for most part was really good in Game 7. He played really good in Game 7 of the '81 Conference Finals against the Sixers. He was incredible in Game 7 of the '84 semifinals against the Knicks. He was solid against the Lakers in Game 7 of the '84 Finals, and of course Game 7 of the 88 semifinals against the Hawks when he scored like 34 points and shot like over, I think, 50% in that series. And then you also got Game 7 of the 87 semifinals against the Bucks, I believe. Game 7 of the 87 conference finals against the Pistons. He played really good in that series. One thing I will say about Bird in the 87 finals, games 1, 2, 3, he was playing really good. But then, like, for some reason, games 4, 5, and 6, he really drops. Like, he wasn't scoring as good for some reason. Like, if you look at it, games 1 through 3, 87 finals, Bird, like, his numbers were good, actually. But then games 4, 5, and 6 in the 87 finals, it really dropped.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I can't really add more to that. I think personally that Larry Bird, he always shows up. To some capacity, whether it's like as a primary scorer or whether he's leading the team in rebounds. Because I think he had a lot of series where he did that as well. Even though it's like you have Robert Parrish on your team and Bill Walton on the bench, and then you have Kevin McHale in the mix as well. Like also is their best playmaker. He's just one of those do it all guys. And yeah, I think he's a playoff riser.
All right. Let's do a current player now. Do you want to pick?
You could pick a current
Okay.
player.
You know what? Let's do Kawhi Leonard.
Why Leonard? Are you gonna start or you want me to start?
I can start actually. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm not really gonna say much about Kawhi Leonard before 15 or 2016. I mean, I guess you can say like in 2013, 2014, before like he became a star player. I mean, 2013, 2014 playoffs when Spurs went to the finals back-to-back years and won it in 2014. I will say Kawhi more so increase than a decrease. I remember in the 20 watching the 2014 finals and how good he played in games 3 through 5. Because I remember at the time when I was watching Kawhi Leonard in the 2014 playoffs, games 3 through 5, how good he played and how efficient he was. Because I think he averaged like 23 points on like over 60 field goal percentage games 3 through 5. Because I think 2 of the games he shot like 70%. When I saw that, I was like, man, this guy, if you give him the minutes, and stuff, he can be a potential superstar. And eventually he did became a potential superstar because at that time I believed that Kawhi could become a really good scorer, and of course he was arguably the best perimeter defender at the time in the 2014 finals, and then like 2017 he became a superstar, and pretty ever since 2017, whenever Kawhi Leonard ends out of playoffs, he scores better. He's definitely more efficient. Like in the 2019 playoffs, his points per game went up by like 4 or 5 because in the season he averaged like 26, 27 points, but then in the 2019 playoffs he averages like over 30 points. And what makes that more impressive is that his efficiency went up. And of course, I know a lot of people are gonna say it was a lucky shot. The Game 7 semifinals against Sixers. I know, like I said, people are gonna say it was a lucky shot because how he made the shot because the ball bounced like 4 or 5 times. And then you have, of course, he didn't make it to playoffs in 2018 because he was hurt for pretty much the entire season. And then like 2000, I think 21, his points per game went up by 3 or 4. And just last night against the Suns, he put up like 38 points on insane efficiency.
Yeah, I think for Kawhi, like I guess it's hard to gauge 2012 and maybe even 2013 just because he didn't really have expectations then. And I guess even for parts of 2014, you could say the same thing. But I think like that's kind of where it starts for him because like when you think about 2014, you said the last 3 games. Like in those last 3 games, I personally think he outplayed LeBron, and that's crazy because it's like he's a third-year player. He's only 22 years old, and LeBron, in Miami, that was probably the best version we've seen of LeBron. I'd probably argue that for a critical stretch of a series, that might be the only time that someone outplayed LeBron like in a series other than like in the 2011 year. So like you count the last 3 years, that might be the only time someone's ever done that. And you think like he was 69% from the field, 54% from three, and 84% from the free throw line in the last 3 games, averaging 24, 9, 2 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks, more steals than turnovers a game as well. and then while he was guarding LeBron as well, who had like 4 turnovers a game himself. Like that's already probably like, especially at that time, that's like the biggest compliment that you could give him. And then for several years too, like I believe in 2016 and 2017, like he led the league in box plus minus in the playoffs. I believe he had a in 2017 might be his most underrated run just because he had those injuries and he missed a critical game against Houston and then he missed a majority of the series against Golden State after the Pachulia injury. But he was playing out of his mind as well, especially that Memphis series. And I don't know, like I think against Memphis, I just pulled it up. He averaged 31 points a game. Like I don't think people will give that series enough credit either. And even in 2016, he was solid. Obviously, in 2019, that might be like one of the most impressive runs ever. I mean, we talked about Dirk earlier. I'd probably say Dirk's is more impressive, just given like no one like Kawhi at that time had already kind of proven it as a Finals MVP. Like he's one of the best two-way players in the league, and the Raptors were always going to be in the mix. But it seems like maybe not to Dirk's level necessarily, but I don't know. I just think that he's always risen in the playoffs. I say that of all the stars I've ever seen, you compare from the regular season to the playoffs, I think he jumps up the most. And that's of like being both a regular season star and a postseason star. Because, we've seen guys that maybe they're regular season stars, they're not postseason stars, so it's hard to even put him in that category. But as for Kawhi, I mean, in 2019, he was insane against Philly. Not even just like that shot, but he was just insane. Did a great job defending Giannis in the next round. And then in the finals that year, he really outplayed the Warriors. I know people love to say like, oh, they were injured and stuff, but majority of that series they had their big three at least two. The big three that they won, 3 championships with, and they were saying we don't need Kevin Durant. Like we could still do it without him. We didn't need him just to defend themselves. Well, clearly either they did need him or they just got beat down by Kawhi Leonard. And I think it's partially true on both ends. And then in 2020, I think even that, like people give him too much flack for that because he was insane against Dallas, outplayed Luka in the whole series. Luka, who's pretty much been deemed as one of the best playoff performers we've seen at such a young age right now, and yet Kawhi outplayed him that year and the next year too. And then even in that Nuggets series when they lost, and they blew a 3-1 lead, it shouldn't give it shouldn't be too much on Kawhi. He had a bad second half in Game 7. I personally think if he played good in the second half in Game 7, they still were not going to win that game. Like the Nuggets just had so much momentum, they were almost making everything down the stretch of that game. But even for that series, Kawhi led the team in points per game, rebounds a game, assists per game, steals per game, and blocks per game. There's not a lot of players that have done that. So even though he did blow a 3-1 lead, I think you got to look more at the whole big picture and like what was Lou Williams doing that series? Why couldn't Montrezl Harrell guard Jokic? Like there's a whole lot of things. Why was Paul George not playing well? There's a whole lot of things that you can look at before. Well, where was Kawhi? Because in Game 5 and 6 he was insane, but they still came up short. And then in 2021, I think he was showing again why he's the best player on the planet, especially against Utah too. But that Game 6 against Dallas was insane. And then we just saw his Game 1 against Phoenix, and this is why I think like when he's healthy, like he is the scariest player on the planet because you don't want to go against him. He can lock you up. He'll make basically everything, and while doing so, doesn't even look like he's trying. Like it's just second nature to him. So I think he's definitely a playoff riser. Probably rises more than any other star in history.
Yeah, I would say since 2017, Kawhi has definitely been one of the best player performers. Out of the current players right now, if I can have any current player in the playoffs when healthy, most likely I'm picking Kawhi Leonard.
Agreed.
Okay, let's go to a past player. You know what? Let's do Michael Jordan. You gotta talk about Michael Jordan in the playoffs. As great as Michael Jordan was in a regular season, in his prime, I would say 1987 to 98, he always increased in the playoffs. Always putting up these big scoring numbers. I think his defense got better. He had that better clutch in the playoffs, like the '88 playoffs, the first round. in the closing game. He played well against the Cavs. He was great in the whole entire series. And in '89, closing game against the Cavs, I think he scored just about 40 points or just under 40 points. He might have scored 40 points actually in that game five, first round against the Cavs, the game where he made that clutch shot known as the shot. And then I think like in the '92 semifinals, game seven against the Knicks, he scored like 42 points in that game. Because like '87 to '98, when facing elimination, Jordan averaged like 32 points. And like in '97 finals in the flu game, what makes see I know Jordan had a great performance in that game because he scored 38 points. What makes more impressive was how clutch he was, and I think he did play pretty good defense. Because pretty much all the other Bulls roster, Scottie Pippen, and them, they didn't do good in that game five, the flu game, because they underperformed. So Jordan really had to step up in that game, even though he wasn't feeling 100%. And I also think that like, of course, he got the '93 finals. He averaged like 41 points, and '92 finals he averaged like 35 points. In '91 finals, he was the Bulls' best scorer and best playmaker, averaging over 30 points and like 10 or 11 assists. And in the '89 playoffs, even when the Bulls reached the conference finals, he was, you could argue, he was the Bulls' best scorer, best passer slash playmaker, and their best, at least their best perimeter defender, maybe their best defender overall. Because he averaged like 32 points, 8 rebounds, 8 assists in the '89 playoffs while reaching the Eastern Conference Finals. You take away Jordan, the Bulls would not even probably pass the first round in the '89 playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Jordan, like, you just think about throughout his career, he's made the playoffs 13 times, and 10 of those times he led the league in scoring, too. He led the league, like, in the playoffs in steals per game multiple times as well. And then even from day one as a rookie, led the league in minutes per game in the playoffs. But you think about that Boston series where basically Larry Bird, like, called him like a god of basketball when he averaged like 43.7 points a game. And then I think too, I know a lot of people talk about 1989 because that was the year like with the shot, over Craig Elo and stuff, and that was an insane series too, where he's putting up like 40 a game. But that series the year before against Cleveland too, he averaged like 45, like 5 and 5. Like that still is to this day the biggest scoring carry job in NBA history. Because if you look at the rest of the guys that scored, Charles Oakley was the next best scorer on Chicago with 10.8 a game. And then, Scottie Pippen, 10.6. Nobody else was even in double figures. But you look at the Cavs side of things, Mark Price averaged 21, Larry Nance 17, Brad Daugherty 16, um, Ron Harper 18, and then Mike Sanders 13. Like, so their first, second, third, fourth, and fifth leading scorer all scored more than every other Chicago Bull not named Michael Jordan, who also in this series scored 105 points over the first two games while leading them to a win, which I still believe to this day is the most over a combined two-game stretch in the playoffs in NBA history. So you look at that, and this is just the stuff he was doing before he was winning championships as well. Um, had a big series against Charles Barkley and the Sixers prior to when he joined the Phoenix Suns. I feel like people leave that out. And then we know what he's made of in the finals. I mean, 6-0. He still, I believe, has the highest assists per game average in 1991 of a guy that wasn't a point guard in a final series. And then 1992 with the shrug game, basically was insane. He could not miss a three, it felt like. And then in 1993, going against the Phoenix Suns, where I believe he dropped a 55 piece against them as well. So you look at like all these performances, and then 1996 on Father's Day, the 72 and 10 year, all coming into fruition. Even the year like that he took off and or he came back midway through from baseball, like he still averaged like 31, 6 and 5 in that playoff run. And even Shaq himself said that in that Orlando series, that Michael Jordan was the best player in that series, and he was also the best player in the world. So I feel like people maybe that's the one thing that you could hold against him is he didn't make the finals every year in the '90s because he came back or whatever. But even we got Shaquille O'Neal, who's a top 10 player of all time. In my opinion, I have him, I believe, seventh all time. So he's saying this about Michael Jordan, and I mean, you just gotta accept it. And then '97, like you said, the flu game. He had an insane series against the Bullets in the first round. And then in 1998, that was kind of the last dance, and where he just kind of took over, and he had 45 in his last playoff game ever. That still is the most points by a player in their final playoff game ever to this day. And then you also think about just how that game transpired down the stretch. Very low scoring, 87-86, but Michael Jordan had 16 of those points in the final quarter as well. Like you think about or series clinching, championship clinching quarters in the fourth quarter. I I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but that's probably got to be the most that we've seen in NBA history. And then in the last 40 seconds, when you're down three, chance to for the Jazz to push the game seven, and this is when it was the 2-3-2 format. So if the Jazz win, they're going to get another home game in Utah for game seven. But Michael Jordan then comes up with, I think, the greatest, actually, I don't think, I know, the greatest multiplay sequence in NBA history, where he scores that quick 2-for-1 layup, and he gets to steal him alone, and then he hits the shot of all shots to win the championship. I mean, personally for me, like, he's definitely a playoff riser. I don't know if, like, from just because he's so great in the regular season too, I don't know if the rise is maybe as dramatic as Kawhi's rise, like from regular season to playoffs. But I do think that Michael Jordan is the greatest playoff performer that we've ever seen. So he definitely rises in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. When you compare all time greats in their prime in the playoffs, I think Michael Jordan is the greatest playoff performer. Another thing I want to say about Jordan playoffs is I know in back to back seasons in '92 and '93, the he took out the Cavs, and that Cavs team was actually pretty good because they had Larry Nance Sr., Mark Price, and Brad Daughtry, and he averaged over 30 points in both those series.
Agreed.
All right, moving on to the next player. All right, you know what? Let's do LeBron James actually.
All right, let's. You want to go first?
Yeah, I do. I'm not the biggest. I will say I've said this many times. I'll say it again. I'm not the biggest LeBron fan. Of course, I'm not gonna say I hate him or dislike him. It's just I'm not as big as a fan as what most people that grew up watching him. Because I grew up watching LeBron, but I gotta admit, for vast majority of his career, he has definitely more so increased in the playoffs compared to the regular season, especially since 2012. Because I feel like like his from 2005 to 2011, even though LeBron was in the playoffs every year, he wasn't that good as what people make him out to be. Because in 2007, I know people like to hype up his 2007 playoff run for some reason, even though the the road to me was easy, because the Eastern Conference 2007 was weaker when compared to the West. And the 2007 Finals, of course, I didn't expect the Cavs to beat the Spurs in that series, but in the 2007 Finals, LeBron only shot like 35%, and I'm pretty sure like two or three of the games in that series, at least two or three of the games in that series, were close. Like you can imagine if LeBron was more efficient in that series, he shot better. The Cavs could at least have got one win in that series. But no matter what, Spurs just had too much star power and too much talent, for the Cavs to beat them. And of course, in 2008, in semifinals against Boston, like Celtics just kept locking down LeBron. LeBron didn't know what to do. He couldn't score as good, and of course in a season, and like I think he shot like 35% in that series. And then 2009 is the only series in the Eastern Conference Finals, is the only series I would probably say from 2005 to 2011 where I wouldn't consider LeBron choking or really underperforming. The only issue I think LeBron had in the 2009 Conference Finals was like turnovers. Because that series, LeBron actually averaged like 35 points and he shot about like 50%. He had like one or two bad games in that series, but like 4 to 5 games he played really good actually. In 2010 semifinals, the first three games he played really good, but it feels like after game three or game four he just gave up. Like, because in one game, I think it was game five or six, he had like 9 turnovers or like 9 or 10 turnovers in that game. And of course, we all know what happened in 2011 final. What happened in 2011 finals, averaging 17 points. That actually reminds me. I remember one time on Twitter, I saw a comparison between LeBron's 2011 Finals performance to to Kawhi Leonard's 2014 Finals performance. And this person tweeted, "How can you say LeBron underperformed and choked in the 2011 Finals, but not say the same thing about Kawhi Leonard in 2014?" Which is well, it's simple because the expectations were much higher for LeBron when you compare at that time, because in 2014 Kawhi wasn't a superstar, let alone even a star player at that time. LeBron in 2011 was considered the best player, so that's why. And of course, the only thing I'm gonna say about but ever since like 2012, I feel like LeBron has for sure definitely gotten better in the playoffs. I think in 2012, he definitely, I will admit, redeemed himself because he had that great performance in Game 6 against Celtics when he put up like, I think like 45 points and like 14 or 15 rebounds, 5 assists, and shot like over 65%. And of course, he played great in Game 7. And I remember the 2013 finals, games 1, 2, 3, he wasn't doing as good, but then like games 4 through 7, he averaged like nearly 30 points. In the two most important games, both most wins, games 6 and 7, he plays really good because in game 6 in the 2013 finals, he had like a 32-point triple double, and in game 7, he put up like 37 points. And I'm pretty sure at one point in the fourth quarter, LeBron did made a clinching three that pretty much clinched the game for the Heat to win that series in 2013. 2014 finals, I think at least some of his stats were in garbage time. Still, I'm not gonna say he really choked in that series. And like you mentioned earlier, games 3 through 5, Kawhi Leonard did outplay him, and I agree when you combine offense, efficiency, and defense. I will say games 3 through 5, Kawhi did outplay LeBron. Games 3 through 5 in the 2014 finals. 2015 playoffs, I think LeBron like his efficiency was going down because he was barely shooting like 40% in that series. That could be due to the fact because he had to carry the ball more. He was being double teamed more because I think Kevin Love was hurt most of the 2015 playoffs, and of course eventually in the finals, Kyrie Irving got hurt in the 2015 finals, and then 2016 LeBron played overall in the playoffs he played really good. 2017 finals, I know stats don't tell the full story, but it's hard to say a player choked when he averaged like a 33-point triple double. The only thing I could say about LeBron in the 2017 finals was that he could have played some defense on Kevin Durant, because I don't know who LeBron was. I can't remember who LeBron was trying to guard in the 2017 finals, because if it was Kevin Durant, he didn't do a good job, because Kevin Durant in 2017 finals averaged like 35 points on insane efficiency. And of course, LeBron had a great playoff run 2018. But yeah, I would say, especially since 2012 to 2020, LeBron has definitely more so increased than decreased in the playoffs.
Yeah, I just think that, like, personally for me, like, if we when we think about LeBron, at least like where a lot of his fans, stack him up is, he has to be in a goat conversation, and if you're thinking like of the goat conversation, it usually starts with Michael Jordan, and considering that he's never played a single NBA game against Michael Jordan, and because Michael Jordan always got the best of his opponents, you would think that LeBron would kind of have to as well. And for the most part, he definitely has. Like, there's a lot of times where he's gotten the best of all these players. And that's a big reason why he went to 10 NBA Finals. But, I mean, there are some times, too. I mean, like, in 2007, he was great, and he led that, big, like, 25 straight points where he contributed to or scored to lead them to the finals against Detroit. But then, of course, he underperformed in the finals in 2007 against the Spurs. And I don't really like use that too much against him necessarily. But even then, like the whole big three for the Spurs outplayed him in that series. But I don't use it too much against him just because he wasn't deemed as maybe the best player in the world. Now maybe like when you get into 2009 when he lost as the favorite to Orlando, you could start making that argument. I don't really use that against him either, just because I thought he played well. But in 2010, I thought that he kind of gave up on his teammates, like you said. And personally, for me, I mean, I think really that Rondo outplayed him in that series. Because if you look back at it, like Rondo averaged about 21, 12, and 6 in that series. He had like 30 more assists and 5 less turnovers than LeBron. And he was more efficient from the field than LeBron. So looking at all that, like he was more efficient from the field, from three. Looking at all that, and the Celtics won that series, and they came back down 2-1. Like I would say that Rondo outplayed him there. I would say that in the 2011 finals, that's a huge stain on his legacy, really, as a not really as a all-time great, but just as like the GOAT conversation entails. And he got outplayed by Dirk Nowitzki, outscored by Jason Terry. He was outplayed by Dwayne Wade in that series, and he was also outplayed by Dwayne Wade in the Boston series earlier that playoffs too. Like there hasn't really been a series where Michael Jordan per se was outplayed by his teammate or outscored by his teammate. And in that Boston series in 2011, Dwayne Wade was their best player. And then as you get through like maybe 2012, obviously had that big game against Boston where he dropped 45 points in Game 6 with his back against the wall. And then you get to 2013, even though he did like kind of struggle the first few games of the finals, still he was obviously the best player in that series. And he won Finals MVP. We talked kind of about 2014, how the last three games, like Kawhi was, better than him, and we used those last three games because the series was 1-1, and we don't know how things would have transpired after that, really. And if I'm, not mistaken, is that the Spurs had home court advantage as well, which means that it started out with them in the series. So part of those games, I actually want to check that right now, but yeah, like two of those three games that they lost in a blowout fashion, still is the biggest blowout ever. Like we're in Miami as well. So and I get it. Like Dwayne Wade wasn't great that series. Chris Bosh wasn't. The other guys were not. But even then, like a lot of LeBron's scoring kind of came in garbage time, and even then, like Kawhi still outplayed him. I think in 2015, like maybe he gets a little bit of a pass against my Bulls personally because of a missed timeout call. I don't really hold it too much against him that series against the Warriors because with both Kyrie and Kevin Love being out, it makes sense. And then 2016 he was great. 2017 same thing, but I will say like Kevin Durant in those finals was, even though LeBron was great, Kevin Durant was better than him in that series. And then in 2018, I would say that LeBron all throughout was consistently the best player every series. He just fell up short. And then even in the bubble, like there was a series where Anthony Davis was the best player against the Denver Nuggets as well. And then if you look back even to 2021 against the Phoenix Suns, Devin Booker was a better player than LeBron. So if you look at like all throughout the years, there's a series where Devin Booker was the best player, where Anthony Davis was the best player, where Kevin Durant was, where truly Kawhi Leonard was, if you ask me, Rajon Rondo, Dirk Nowitzki, Dwayne Wade, then the whole big three of the Spurs. That's like 10 instances where someone was the best player other than LeBron James, whether it was on his own team or on the other team. And even though, like I said, majority of the time he does step up, so I would have to say he is a playoff riser. I just think that maybe he is a little overrated in the playoffs, at least when we're comparing him to like the GOAT or to Michael Jordan. I think it becomes a little bit outstretched. So that's kind of like what I would say. And because of those instances, it's happened multiple times. It's kind of hard to say that he would be up there. So yeah.
One thing I will say about LeBron is I can't believe I'm saying this, and I'm only saying this because Jordan didn't play enough Game Sevens. I would argue when it comes to Game 7 in the playoffs, I would say comparing the primes, LeBron is the greatest Game 7 performer because from like 2012 to 2020, well even before 2012, LeBron definitely always showed up in Game 7 because like I said, Game 7 the 2012 Conference Finals, the 2013 Finals, 2013 Eastern Conference Finals, of course the 2016 Finals. And I think 2018 in the first round against the Pacers, that series went to Game 7, and LeBron scored like over 40 points. And of course, he got Game 7 of the 2018 Eastern Conference Finals. And I think Game 7 2006 against the Pistons, I think it was the semifinals or first round, something like that. LeBron played really good. So I would argue, of all the players that play a certain amount of Game 7s, LeBron is the best Game 7 player performer.
I mean, yeah, that's probably true. I mean, there is like other things, I guess, to argue that, like, because there is 3 straight years, like from 2009 to 2011, where they were down 3-2 in their respective series, like the LeBron teams, and they still managed to lose all of them. And in two of those three games, at least, like LeBron didn't look good. And then also like you could look at when he got swept, or well, not swept. It was basically a sweep, but it was a 4-1 series against the Spurs in 2014. When he got swept in 2018, like so, there's been instances where like maybe he's like kind of given up essentially, or like threw in the towel, something like that, and or just didn't perform as well as he should have, and those weren't in Game 7. So I think like the one thing I would say to that is that part of it is Michael Jordan didn't go to as many Game 7s. He did go to some throughout his career, just not as many. But I think part of it is too like I don't think he's gonna like some of these players aren't gonna want to go to a Game 7. They're gonna
Yeah.
try and win in 4 or 5 or But yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the next player. Let's do a retired player. You know what? We gotta talk about my all-time favorite player, Kobe Bryant, the Black Mama. Is it okay if I start?
That's,
All right. So, one thing I noticed about Kobe in the playoffs, the farther his team, the Lakers, get in the playoffs, it seems the better the Kobe Bryant gets. Like for example, in the 2001 playoffs, he averaged like nearly 30 points, 6 or 7 assists. I mean, 6 or 7 rebounds, and about 6 or 7 assists. And I think his efficiency went up. And it's kind of crazy that he put up those numbers, considering the fact that he was considered the second option. Because I will say Shaq in 2001 was obviously the most dominant player, and he was the Lakers' first option. So, given the fact that Kobe in the 01 playoffs averaged nearly 30 points, 6 or 7 rebounds, and like 6 or 7 assists, is insane. Like in 2001 playoffs, Kobe, he was a great scorer. He was a solid perimeter defender. In 2001 conference finals against the Spurs, he averaged like 33 points, 7 boards, 7 assists, and shot like I think he shot like 51 field goal percentage, something like that. And of course, I think the reason why he didn't do as good in the finals in 2001 is because they let Shaq do most of the dominant. But even though 2001 finals, I would say Kobe did pretty solid. He averaged like 24 points. In 2002 playoffs, once again, Kobe, his numbers got better compared to the regular season. In 2008, 2010, when the Lakers went to the finals 3 years in a row, when Shaq was gone and Kobe was now the Lakers' best player, number one option, in that 3 year playoff stretch, Kobe averaged like nearly 30 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, with like a 46 field goal percentage, and he always increased in the playoffs. Like one thing I don't know if you noticed, but if you look at Kobe Bryant's stats, or numbers, or how good he did in the Western Conference Finals from 2008 to 2010, it's really good actually. Like he averaged like over 30 points on like a nearly 50, 40, 90 shooting splits in the Western Conference Finals between 2008 to 2010. That 2010 Conference Finals against the Suns, I would argue, is Kobe Bryant's all-time best playoff series because he averaged like 33, 34 points, I think like 7 or 8 assists, and about like at least 5 rebounds. And his efficiency was ridiculous. In the 2009 Conference Finals against the Denver Nuggets, I think that series went to 6 games. Kobe averaged like 34 points, over 5 boards, 5 assists, shot like over 50%. In 2008 Conference Finals, he against Spurs, he played really good. I know some people. So far, I would say Kobe more often than less, more so increased and decreased in the playoffs, especially when he got deep. Like the only year where I would say Kobe decreased in the playoffs, where his team, the Lakers, reached the finals, was 2004. Honestly, that's the only year I can think of where Kobe, when the Lakers reached the finals from 2000 to 2010. When the Kobe era, where Kobe decreased in the playoffs in 2004. That's the only year. The other years, like even in 2000, 2001, 2002, 2008, 2009, 2010, I would say Kobe got better in the playoffs, and I'm sure that's a big reason why Kobe reached the finals. And I got it. Speaking of Kobe, I think what makes being able to at least be as good in the playoffs or increase in the playoffs is the competition he was got going up against. Because you gotta remember and how tough the Western Conference was between 2000 to like 2010. Kobe's the only player to beat 450 plus win teams in multiple playoff runs, and he did it in 2001 and 2010. And both those playoff runs, Kobe was at least a superstar caliber player. I know some might say, oh, but in the 2008 finals, he didn't do as good. He wasn't as efficient. Well, I mean, yeah, in the finals, he did drop, but overall in the 2008 playoffs, he averaged like 30 points, like a 45, 46 field goal percentage. Because the first three rounds of 2008 playoffs, he played really good. In the 2010 finals, he shot like only like 40 a field goal percentage. But I'm not gonna hold him accountable that much, given the fact he had like a ankle injury, and I'm pretty sure he also had a broken index finger, which could mess up your shooting. Because I think it was Kobe's shooting hand that was broken with his broken index finger. So I would say definitely more so than less Kobe increase in the playoffs compared to the regular season, especially when he got deep in the playoffs. I never really considered Kobe a playoff choker. To me, 2004 and maybe 2008 were the only years I would say Kobe choked. And you can say 2006, he in the, Game 7, people say he gave up.
Yeah, I mean, not really too much I'm going to add there. I think you kind of hit on most of the points. I think just when you think about for a majority of his career, I still think that 2000s Western Conference is probably the best decade of any like conference of competition we've seen in the league history. Because like you look at obviously Dirk, and you look at the big three Spurs, and you look at Steve Nash's Suns, and you look at the Blazers, who always had some solid teams, and the T Mac and Yao Rockets, and Kevin Garnett with the Wolves for a bit, and Melo's Nuggets, and the Jazz and stuff, and he managed to come out victorious against those guys a majority of the time over that stretch as well. As a critical player, because I mean you could argue like maybe Tim Duncan did too, but he also got one of those before and after that decade, and I think the one he got in 2014, he wasn't quite the player that he was in the earlier ones, so it's a little bit different. And I think Kobe always played well really against the Spurs, and he played really well those years against Utah, like 3 straight years near the end of the 20 or 2000s decade. I think of those 12 series he played from '08 to 2010, they won 11 of those 12, and all of them except I think the OKC one in 2010 was against a team that won 50 games, and I think even that OKC team won like 49 games if I'm not mistaken. So
OKC
they
2010 did win 50 games.
they won 50 games, or I might be maybe it's Utah
It
in
is.
2009 that won
Yep,
49. Yeah,
it
I knew
is.
one of them was weird. But the point is like still like every team you play is basically a 50-win team. You think about 49 wins right now, that would give you the third seed in the Western Conference.
Yeah, it
So
would.
every team you're playing, is a third seed or higher level right now. And you think about all the good teams right now. Like think about how good the Kings have been this year, how good the Suns look with Kevin Durant stuff, and the Clippers and all that stuff. Like the Warriors are always in it. Like all those teams have a worse record than all these teams that Kobe played for 3 straight years. And obviously it'd be different if you mix all these teams together. But my point is that like this is the level of competition you had to face every single round. It's almost like you had no easy series. Like everything you had to grind it out. And a majority of those series, like he won pretty convincingly too. I think there was only two of them that he won, and it went to 7 games. And that was the 2010 finals and then 2009 against Houston. But all those other series, like 4-1 against Orlando, he swept Utah, and then one year went 4-1, one year went 4-2. He swept Denver, like I think with AI on the team and Melo, like so. And I think personally that series against Phoenix in 2010, I feel like personally that's his best series of his career, just because the Suns maybe they weren't quite the Suns that they were years prior, and they kind of lost a bit when they lost Sean Marion. But at the end of the day, like they still have Steve Nash over there, who in my opinion is a top 5 point guard ever, and they still had Amari Stoudemire pre-injury, who was playing like one of the top 15 players in the league. Like so that's a tough tandem to go against, and yet he still played insane, averaged like almost like 34, 8 and 8 or something like that. And even then, like I know like maybe 2011 you could hold against him, I guess, but of course I think he was playing injured that year too. And then in 2012, like even though they lost to OKC, I think for one, like there was kind of like a little bit of a thing going on with the team in general. Like it was kind of like a shift going on. But even in that series, he averaged 31 points a game, and in the last game, he dropped 40 points, which we just talked about Michael Jordan's last game as the most ever. by someone in their last playoff game. That's the second most ever by anyone in their last playoff game. So I definitely think that Kobe rises in the playoffs. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that.
All right. Do you want to talk about any more players?
Um, I don't know. I don't know if you have any you wanted, but I don't know if I can think of any right now.
Okay. Um. Okay. So I'm gonna talk about one more thing. Okay. In your
Okay.
opinion, which dynasty was better, the '80s Lakers or the '90s Bulls? Which dynasty had more success?
Between the '80s Lakers and the '90s Bulls,
Yeah.
I would have to say the '90s Bulls. I just feel like the '90s Bulls are the epitome of basketball, just because like I don't know, like you dream of having a guy like Michael Jordan who can be like that primary scoring option, and essentially like everyone bought in on those teams, and that's why every single year they were able to run from day one until the end of the year. Throughout the '90s, they were successful because I don't really count. I mean, the '89-'90 season, I guess you could count, but that's not fully the '90s. And then as for '94, '95, Jordan came back midway through the year, actually like way later than that, in like March. So hard to count those years. Every other year in the '90s, there was full basketball with that unit of Jordan, Pippen, um, Phil Jackson. Part of the time Horace Grant, then the other part of the time Dennis Rodman. Like they got it done. The Lakers were great, and I know Showtime is great. They've had their ups and downs too. Like I know in '81, they lost a crucial series against Moses Malone and the Rockets. Obviously, you had Bird Celtics that were up there as well. During the later half of the decade, Kareem started to get older and then eventually would retire. And then, the Pistons kind of took over for a little bit. So I just feel like nobody could stop the Bulls when they were like truly the Bulls, if that even makes sense. Just because like when they were together, nobody could stop them during that '90s era, and the only person that was able to win during that era was the Houston Rockets when they were around. But again, even then, like Jordan only played like a month of regular season basketball before that time, and there was kind of like there's still a little bit of a transition because you had Tony Kukoc coming in the mix. You lost Horace Grant. You didn't get Dennis Rodman yet. So it was kind of like a weird. I think the '94-'95 season was weird for the Bulls. I think in '93, '94, they were able to piggyback off of it a little bit and ride that success. But then the next year, it wasn't really so much, and they almost were on the brink of missing the playoffs until Jordan came back. So, um, but I think when they were whole, you couldn't stop that team. Showtime, some teams did get the best of them. Like we said, the Rockets knocked them out the one year, and then obviously like Bird Celtics and the 76ers the one year with Dr. J. Moses Malone won a championship. Um, in 1986 with Hakeem and Ralph Sampson, they got to the finals, and then of course like the Bad Boys near the end of the time, like they ended up like running the league for a couple years. So I would say the Bulls.
Yeah, yeah. To me, it's really close. I can understand why you say the Bulls because when they're together, when Jordan was there, together and fully healthy, no one could really beat that Bulls team. That Bulls team had everything he needed. They had the best player and the greatest scorer and arguably the best defensive shooting guard of all time, Michael Jordan. Of course, Scottie Pippen was a pretty solid second option. And of course, during the second three-peat, they had the greatest rebounder and who was a really good defender overall, Dennis Rodman. And even like through the first three-peat, they had Horace Grant, who I'm pretty sure was also a pretty good def- defender. And as great as the Bulls' offense was from like 91 to 98, I would argue usually their defense was actually better, especially during the second three-peat, because one year in 96, all three, Jordan, Pippen, and Dennis Rodman, made it to the all defensive team. And that's the only NBA championship team that I can think of to have that many all defensive caliber players, to make it to the all defensive team. And I think what hurts the Showtime Lakers was how often they would lose in the finals. They got swept in '83. They lost to the Celtics in '84 in 7 games. They also got swept in '89. Some might say, oh, because Magic Johnson was hurt, but they still got swept. and Kareem was past his prime by then. That was Kareem's last season, 89. And then, uh, let's see. A lot of people say the Lakers got lucky in 88 because, a lot of people say, I think it was game 6 or game 7 where there was a foul call on, what's his name? On Bill Lambert or something like that because Kareem he didn't get the foul call, but I think went to the free throw line. A lot of people say that was a BS call. I don't know if you knew about that. When of course Isaiah Thomas was hurt, and both game 6 and 7 of the '88 finals was really close. I think Lakers won game 6, 103 to 102, and game 7, 108 to like 105. And and also in '81, the Lakers lost in the first round. I think Magic Johnson was hurt though, and then I think '86 they couldn't beat in the conference finals. They lost against the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that the Bulls, personally, they're the best dynasty you've ever seen. You can make an argument that Showtime is second, but I think the Bulls are number one.
Well, I do think
It,
'90s Bulls and '80s Lakers are the top two greatest dynasties.
do I think that? Is that what you're asking?
No, that's what I think.
Oh, I mean, yeah, like I would probably agree though with that. I think the only other thing you could argue is maybe like the Celtics in the '60s, but either way, like it's a little bit harder to gauge just because there was not quite as many teams. So I guess like the pathway there might have been a little bit different. Also, kind of before free agency was as expanded as it is today. So either way, I think those are probably the top three. I can't really think of another off the top of my head that would. I mean, I guess you could throw in the Spurs just because they've been good for so long, like from '97 to 2000, like 19. So maybe them, maybe the Warriors, like in the recent years, but I wouldn't really put them up there with either of those teams.
Yeah, speaking of the Spurs, I do think it's impressive and insane how like every season from like '98 to like 2017 or 2018, the Spurs won 50 plus games, except for '99, but that was because there was only 50 total games in the season. Because even 2012, when there was only six games in the season, I'm pretty sure Spurs actually got 50 wins that season.
They did. Them and my Chicago Bulls were the only teams that year to get 50.
So based on longevity, I would probably say the Spurs, because like I said, every year from like '98 to like 2017 or 2018, Spurs won 50 plus games every year, except for the year in '99 when they had only 50 total games. And of course, you got 5 championships, 6 finals appearances.
Yeah, they're definitely up there for sure.
All right. Anything else you'd like to talk about?
I don't think so right now.
Okay. All right. Well, that'll be it. So you don't have anything else?
I don't think so right now. I mean, yeah, nothing's coming to mind.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for doing this.
No problem.
I appreciate it.
Yep, sounds good.